Hello and welcome once again to the IronCrown workshop. This is episode 4 in our series of constructing a great helm. And in this episode, we'll be shaping the last piece of steel that brings the helmet together and gives it its distinct final shape. The single most important piece of the great helm is the ocular reinforce. Not only does it bring it all together, but it also brings the helmet to life. Out of all the pieces in this great helm, the ocular reinforce that structures the front of this helmet is perhaps one of the hardest to form and shape. But what's interesting about this particular reinforce is that we only see it on these helmets from the second half of the 13th century. What's kind of cool is that ocular reinforce bar is dropped on helmets later on in the process of the evolution of the great helm. And what we have instead is that the faceplate is attached to the top plate, both on the sides and in the front, and that the eye slits narrow a little bit more than what the Ocularium slits are on these Dargen helms. This is the reason why these helmets have this reinforce in the front of the helmet, is because they don't have enough overlap of the steel between the faceplate and the base plate. In fact, they don't overlap at all. And so in order to structure and give strength to the front of these helmets, we need to have that ocular reinforce that not only defines the eye slits, but also locks the front of the helmet together and stops it from caving in under impact from an axe, a lance, or a sword on the battlefield. The first step in this process is to cut a slit in the faceplate of the helmet, creating an opening that will become our final ocularium. It's important to be neat and get this cut exactly even, as it helps to act as a guide when lining up the ocularium reinforce in the next steps. Now that we have the opening cut out into the faceplate of the helmet, we can create the template that will eventually become the ocularium for this helmet. We're going to be applying masking tape to the front of this helmet, which will help to get a two-dimensional representation of our three-dimensional shape. And we're done with the taping. Now we'll put it onto some paper cardstock, and that'll be our templating done. Ooh, yeah. Alright, now that we've finished our template, it's all marked up, we've got our holes punched. We're just going to check it against the front of this helmet to make sure that it matches up with the angles and the curves. And now that we know that that matches up pretty well with the helmet, we can actually cut that out of steel and start forming it for this helmet right here. Awesome, so we've cut this piece of steel out of our sheet. It's in its flat, unformed state, and now it's ready for some shaping. But shaping this piece is actually one of the hardest parts of the entire process. And why is that? That is because you need to get these arms to not only bend to match the exact lines of this helmet, but also we have to put shape and curvature so that this matches the steel as it falls away from the ridge lines on the helmet that we have here. Getting this right is going to be a process of systematic shaping, lots of patience, and lots of heat. That's going to be your biggest friend in getting this to match and fit snugly against the front of this helmet. When shaping the ocularium, it is useful to chisel along the lines that are parallel to the ridge lines of the helmet. The reason for this is because once the steel has been scored with the chisel, it deforms and bends much easier to match the helmet's angles and edges, acting as a guideline for the rest of the process. As an armourer works the steel, he is continually listening, watching, and analysing its movements and flow. Using the techniques and tools at his disposal, he wrestles with the material, adjusting and directing it according to the design he holds in his mind. The struggle and perseverance is infused in the piece until it bends to the will of the artist, moulded into an exact and true shape worthy of the final goal. Awesome, so this is now roughed in, it's ready for the next stage, which is marking all the holes for the bolts and rivets, punching them, drilling them, and then using the bolts and heat to match this exactly onto the helmet. What is happening here is that I am going to undo these bolts all the way around here, take this top plate off, and then get a clamp and just clamp the top there and keep it all nice and tight whilst I heat it and whack it with a hammer. There we go, ocularium done. Yeah, not quite. We need to cut out the eye slits that give it that cold, menacing look that is so iconic and characteristic for this helmet. So what we're gonna do is use the marker and the scribe and mark those out, and then use the angle grinder to cut it out and finish off this piece for the final stage of the forming process. One important thing that cheaper reproductions don't quite get right is that the ocularium reinforce is very thin and the ocular slits are very wide and gappy. Why is that a problem? Well, think about it. If you're a fighter on the battlefield and you have an eye slit that's super wide, a super narrow blade like this ruler, which isn't a blade, but we'll use that for now, could easily just slip right on in there and see you later, your face is cut up. That's not a good day. So, Original helmets had eye slots that were only as wide as necessary for the fighter to be able to see out of, but offered the maximum protection. And we'll be doing the same thing with this one, with our reinforced, and making sure that our eyes stay nice and safe and don't get gouged out. Even at these final stages of the process, attention to detail and quality are of paramount importance. The reinforce is the centerpiece of the entire project. It must be neat and it must be right. In its lines, it carries the purpose, spirit, and craftsmanship of the entire helmet. We are so close to the end of this build, and as the last hammer strokes fall and the lines are filed, the design that we have laid out from the start is brought to life. Through persistence and skill, flames, and countless hammer blows, the final piece of the helmet is forged. At last, we get to see all the pieces coming together to give us the raw and menacing look of this mighty helmet. Wow, what a process! We are now only one episode away from our finished product. So join us in the next episode where we reveal the glimmering steel beneath the scale and assemble the helmet into a piece worthy of the original. See yous all there.